So today we're going to look through this next video for the informal ones, which is the one about choosing the right weapon and ammo, because I put a poll out about what we were going to do next, which is informal topics that people like to see. And it's quite a complicated topic, honestly, because there's just like so much to it in terms of which bullets are the best, which guns are the best, what you can access, what you can't access, that kind of thing. First and foremost, basically, you have to decide on whether you're going to be using something in full auto, semi-auto, or single fire. That really is what matters. And then also the flea market, your trader levels and your workbench levels. That's really the point to it. And also whether money matters to you or not, because like we've seen with the VSS recently, they make the ammo prices really, really, really super expensive. Then you will find it difficult to run the gun. But some people, that's not a problem, and they just want the best of the best, so it doesn't really matter. And then there's a bit of mag capacity choices as well to make, because some guns are a little limited on that. But basically, if we first start off with what is actually what I think are the best things that you can do for single shot and DMR, this is if you've got everything unlocked, but you don't want to do anything that's time gated. So by that, I mean like Workbench 3 in particular. So the best bullets that you can do for single shot and DMR type weapons is BT. 762 by 54R, because SMB, you can't buy it, you have to craft it. And the problem is that this is kind of okay if you are crafting it in Workbench 2 and you don't have Workbench 3, but you really want to be using Workbench 3 to get better ammo than SNB, because you can buy BT, which is 55 pen versus 62 pen of SNB. BT will just clean through basically everything except for class 6, which is one more shot than SNB, but most of the time it doesn't really matter. So I think BT is probably one of the best bullets for single and DMR. And then obviously you've got M62 next, because you can buy this from Peacekeeper. M61 is a craft, so M62 is probably the next best one that you can get for M700, DVL, RFB, M1A, all of those kind of guns. Then for assault rifles, we've got M855A1, because you can buy this from Peacekeeper for your M4s and your AK101s. You can actually get BS from a barter with Prapor. And so that's actually pretty good on. And honestly, any of the 555 AKs, they have a bad rap for having low damage, but they do work and you can make them work. So it's honestly not too bad. Then you've got 366 AP, which is really decent. This is like M80, but upgraded. The issue is it only fits in 2 guns, the VPO 209 and the VPO 215, the semi-auto and the bolty. But it's an extremely, extremely powerful round. And you can get this like in lots of different ways. And we'll go through that in a second where you get it from, but you can get it from traders, from crafting, from loads of places. So it's actually pretty nuts. Then in terms of SMGs, I mean, Naval's kind of, and VSS is sort of on the borderline. You can still buy SP6 from Prapor. This is one of the best rounds that you can still buy, even though it's very expensive now. And then the MP7 with FMJ, which you can buy from Peacekeeper. So those are really all of them. For the shotguns, you still also have Flechette as well. You can buy Flechette for the 12 gauge for like the 153 and stuff, but you have to complete a bunch of quests for that. But then if you include all of the time gate ones, then you've got M61, which is craftable in Workbench 3. But these ones kind of compete with each other, which is why it's problematic. M61, which is arguably one of the best rounds. I think M61 probably is the best round in the entire game. That with the cross-section of the weapons that it goes into, like the RSAS, the SR25, and the M1A, which can get to some of the lowest recoil you can get in the whole of Tarkov for semi-auto, combined with the fact that this just goes through every single piece of armor in the whole game with 64 pen and kills people in 2 shots to the thorax. M61 basically is, I think it's just the best thing, honestly. Then you've got 762 BP, again, Workbench 3 craft with 47 pen. This is a 3-shot against class 5 most of the time, and you can fire it out of full auto guns like the RD and the Mutant, which is why that one ends up being so good. And then you've got M9, M5, which is probably the next one down. You have slightly lower recoil on these weapons, still full auto. I've been using it to great effect with something like the 101, but you could put it in really any of them, the MDR or the SCAR or the M4 if you want a higher fire rate, anything like that. It's a little bit lower damage, but it's not as low as the 545 weapons, and you can stack 55A1 underneath it, which makes it super powerful. I guess like I still kind of want to mention 300 APs, because we were looking at that earlier. This, technically speaking, is one of the best rounds in the game, but the M6 has some issues which make it kind of problematic. So, talking right from the beginning, I always get asked by people what to use at the different levels of progression. So I've basically what I've done is I've gone through and I've figured out what I would do at each level, because otherwise it just gets completely crazy. So at level 1, probably one of the best bullets that you can get is LPS. This comes at level 1 and has 81 damage and 42 pen. So this is pretty much always going to be decent. You start to struggle with class 5, but it can go in the Mosin and it's very, very good. You then have, for early wipe, this is less relevant right this moment, but for the early wipe in the 545 category, once you do delivery from the past, this is useful for next wipe, then you can get PS rounds, which is 48 damage and 31 pen, which is really good in the first couple of weeks because most people, they start to wear class 4, but most people are wearing class 3 or nothing. And this, you only have to complete delivery from the past to get access to it, and it's actually pretty good. Then you've also got the 366 rounds. This is all at level 1, remember. So you've got EKO, which is 73 damage and 30 pen. I personally would prefer PS. I actually do prefer 762 by 39 PS, but you can't buy PS at level 1 anymore. Sometimes you can get it from Fence, and you can get it from Scav, so I actually prefer these guns. But you can buy a 209 early on, and you can use EKO in it, which is very powerful. Again, it's 30 pen, so it'll go through most people's armor early on, but I wouldn't use it so much now in the late wipe if you're kind of coming into it late. Then you've got the 45 match FMJ, which can be bought at Peacekeeper 1, which still has really high damage. This was nerfed slightly, but it's still extremely high, and the pen is 25, which is definitely passable for something that goes on full auto. That pairs with the UMP. We can talk about that in a sec. And then one of my absolute fan favorites is in the Tokarevs, which is the LRNPC. It does the most damage for the PPSH. It only fits in the PPSH. And it gets a small amount of recoil adjustment as well. But this is a leg meta one. And it means you can just avoid people's armor and kill them with that. Some people like to prefer using AKBS, which is a bit lower damage and 1 extra time to kill. You get a very slight increase in recoil reduction. I'm not sure if it's worth it. Some people like it. It also has a bit more pen, and I think it's cheaper than LRNPC. I just prefer having the raw damage, personally. Then in the shotties, really you can use any of them, honestly. I quite like 525 buckshot. This is actually really slow, and so it means that the damage falls off less quickly than something like 7mm, so it'll actually do more damage over, say, 10 meters or 20 meters than 7mm, but at point blank, 7mm will do slightly more. Express, again, the damage falls off even quicker for this because it's even faster, which is crazy. But you can really pick any of them, honestly. The differences between them is really minimal, and they're very similar. And then I guess if you want to use like the Clean or something like that, then you can try and use PMM, which is in Workbench 1, but it only works in the Clean. So you can't use this in the Keda, it only works in the Clean. And then I guess there's an honorable mention, which is Magnum Buckshot. If you like Magnum Buckshot, this does an extreme amount of damage, but it has loads of recoil on it. Pretty good for pump action weapons, less good for semi-autos in my personal experience, but I'm quite used to using the other buckshots with no extra recoil, so this throws me off. But you can technically do 400 damage with this, so people die in 2 shots to the legs. It's very, very, very powerful. In my opinion, the best guns to use at level 1 then, because of all this, is the Mosin or the MP18 if you want to go really, really cheap, but I think that's probably a mistake. With LPS, which is really, that's the professional's choice, because you get sniper levels and you can 1-tap people in the head or 2-tap people to the thorax. For semi-auto, I think it's probably the VPO 209, honestly. It probably is one of the better ones with EKO. It's like genuinely pretty good. And then also 12-gauge shotguns of any kind, really, with any of these buckshots, also is just really good early. And then for full auto, the UMP barter, which you can buy the knives from Fence for, and you can trade that with Mr. Peacekeeper. Then you can use 45 match FMJ. That's still really powerful early. You've also got, the PPSH, which I was talking about before with the LONPC. The AK-74U, if you can access this PS once you've done delivery from the past, quite a good one in my opinion. And then finally the Clin as well. You can get the Clin once you've done BP Depot, so it's quite far down, and you do have to craft like the good ammo for it. But you can actually convert a Keda into a Clin in the hideout, which is kind of interesting. So then the next milestone after that is when you get to level 14, which is Peacekeeper 2, which is interesting because it's 1 level before the flea market. And Peacekeeper 2, technically speaking, and this is the pathway that I go down the whole time, you're probably not going to get it right there and then, but I push on and try to get to M856A1. This is technically Peacekeeper 2. This is much easier to do now because you now don't need the flash drives quest as of this particular wipe. And so you do Skier's quest line, and then you get Friend from the West. You do that, and then you do a couple of quests on Peacekeeper until the Cult Part 1, and you get 56A1. So that's technically available from level 14, in theory, although you need to do some quests. So you probably won't be level 14 when you actually get access to that ammo. He actually opens up an interesting leg meta option with Hydra Shock, which can be kind of good, because that's available at Peacekeeper 2. And this is a 5-shot kill, because it does 100 damage. You're probably still going to be using it in the UMP, but it's one to bear in mind. He also actually allows you to buy 9mm PST, which again was moved up to level 2 traders in this wipe, which is quite interesting. But normally you can get that from Fence 2, and also most both sides, both USEC and Bear, usually start with enough PST that you don't need to worry about it. You usually have enough stocks, but you can get it from Fence if you sold it all or whatever. So in this particular category, you're really thinking about getting to 5.6A1 as fast as you can, and then you can use the MDR and the SCAR, which are, I think, the best sort of all-around mid-range guns for 5.56, and you use those mostly through the early game once you get access to 5.6A1, and use it through a lot of the mid-game too. You could also, in theory, try to use the AUG as well, if you want to, because I think the AUG, like, you don't really need to do anything to it, and it's kind of like a budget M4 if you want to go a bit more CQB. And then, yeah, for the, as we said, for, where was it, for 45, yeah, for Hydra Shock, once you get one more level, you could use the Vector, in theory. Tiny mags, so it's a bit tricky, but the UMP is probably the best bet for that, but the Vector is also a potential thing. There's a Skier Barter for the magazines, but it's quite expensive, so that's sort of problematic. Then you open up onto the flea market. So if you're level 15 and above, you can now buy all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, lots of things are banned, but there's still actually quite a few things that are available. So I wrote down the list of the bullets that you can still actually buy. A lot of them are quite expensive early on, but some of them might be surprising if you go through the list. So 7.62, and you can see actually on the wiki page, because it doesn't have the little like FM with a stroke through. That shows you that you can still actually buy this. So 7.62 by 54 PS, you can buy, and this thing's really good. 84 damage and 45 pen. That will go through all class 4s, to be honest, even LPS and P46 as well, but this thing does a bit more damage, and it's very powerful. This will plow through most things and will actually deal with class 5 if you shoot them enough. It's like an S, probably more so for the SVD than something like the Mosin, but that's actually very, very strong. Then you can buy 7.62 PS off the flea market. I'm not sure why you do that really, because you only need to get to Purple 2 to be able to buy that, but yeah, you can get that from the flea in theory. One that's kind of interesting is you can actually buy 300 Blackout M62 Tracer from the flea. Now this is normally Peacekeeper 3, which is why I think maybe it is interesting, because that's a little bit later on. And this thing performs 54 damage and 36 pen, is almost exactly the same as 5.6A1, which is 54 damage and 37 pen. It's actually 1 pen difference. But you have to do all the quests to get to the Cult Part 2 for this one. Whereas M62 Tracer, you could potentially buy it from the fleet. I mean, this is all going to be pricing dependent, right? Some of them are going to be really expensive. Some of them are going to have no listings. Some of them, there might be something there plentiful. It's just something to check. It's in theory what you can do at level 15. A lot of the 5.45 rounds you actually can get access to on the flea market still. As you can see, you can go all the way up to BP buying from the flea. And so early on, that could be an option if you want to top load with something decent like that, which could be okay. Those are good at dealing with up to class 4 with BP and PP. PP is kind of the staple, in my opinion, once you get to Prapor 2, which we'll talk about in a second. You can also buy FMJ for the MP7, which is another extremely strong bullet. It's normally quite expensive, but again, if you're top loading it, maybe you're playing really early on in the wipe. I wouldn't do this now, but I'd do this early on in the wipe maybe, top load a bit of this with a bit of action if you've got some spare cash. Kind of interesting. You can buy SB193 as well. This one is quite a high level mechanic. I think it's mechanic 3. Well, I think it might be mechanic 4 now. And so being able to get this off the flea market is actually quite cool. 9x21 PS as well for the SR2M, which you can get. And you can basically buy any of the 9x18s. All of these are available in various quantities depending on what players have found. And you can also buy Magnum Buckshot and Flechette. So there's actually tons and tons and tons of options. At level 15, you also get access to Prapor, Jaeger, and Skier level 2 as well. Quest dependent, but that's also in theory. And for that, you have 7.62 NATO BCP, which is kind of the new staple. This got changed in the middle of this wipe, so this kind of missed this missed the boat for this wipe for DMRs, because TCW was high damage but low pen, BCP FMJ was low damage but high pen, or I can't remember which way around it was, and they switched it up so that this is kind of high damage and high pen now, so this is actually useful. But the problem is, because of the way it was before, people kind of like leapfrogged over the RFB, which meant that by the time that this got changed, it was kind of too late. But I think this one's going to be one to watch out for next wipe for sure, this BCP FMJ. I think it's actually okay. It's not that far off M80 now, and it'll still deal with class 4 just fine. So it's kind of the replacement for this. I think this is in a much better spot than it was in beforehand. And that comes from Jaeger 2. So if you get to Jaeger 2, you can buy that bullet. Then Prapor, as we mentioned, Prapor gives you the access to PP ammo, which is the one that I use almost exclusively from level 15 and onwards, because it's got 36 pen, which deals with class 4, and 44 damage, which is not bad. I don't think it's worth paying the price for but for BP, because it's only 1 more damage, 1 more pen. In the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't make enough difference at that level. and I'd rather conserve my money. The other one that's been changed now is that everything got moved down for the SR2M on Prapor, down 1 level. So now you can get PE for the leg meta that you can get on Prapor 2. Sorry, PS is on Prapor 3, but it is really strong, but we'll probably come on to it in a minute. But PE is more like a leg meta round because it's 80 damage. So that's, again, it's another option. And then at Jaeger 2, you can just buy Magnum Buckshot from him outright, which is pretty good. And so you can stick that in your shotties if you are a fan of Magnum. I'm not, but I know a lot of people really, really like it. So from that selection, for single shot there, you want to be using, or you have the ability, I guess, to use the Mosin with PS, in theory, if you can buy it off the flea market, or the SV98. You can buy the 366 AP, so you might want to use this one here. So you might be able to use the VPO 215 really early on if you can buy some of this off the flea market. This is really handy for completing quests like Tarkov Shooter Part 3, getting kills underneath 10 meters, so you can go to factory with VPO and APM just by buying a bit of that off the flea market, which is pretty good. Then for semi-auto, same rounds that we were talking about, PS, like that's SVD. RFB is good because of this BCP unlock. Again, VPO 209 because of 366 AP, and the MP 153 because of either the Flechette Magnum from Jaeger or Magnum off the flea market. And then full auto, you got the AKM because you can get PS at this level. Maybe the MCX if you're buying M62 Tracer, but I think it's a bit of a niche pickup. The AK-74 because you can buy PP, so there's any of those varieties, the 74Us or the longer versions, the 74N or M or whichever one you want to buy from Prapor, because you can now get PP rounds just on tap, which is really neat. Maybe the MP7 if you can buy some FMJs off the flea, but it's like super niche and you can only get 20 rounders, which makes it really, really tough. And then, yeah, maybe the P90, the SR2M, and potentially, again, the Clin and the Kedda, because you can buy all of those rounds off the flea. But those ones, again, are a bit more niche. So the next one after that, so level 15, there's really nothing after that until level 20. And level 20, you unlock both Mechanic 2, which himself is a prerequisite for the Workbench 2, and that opens up like a load more crafts. So in terms of crafting, you get a bunch of different options. This is kind of the point at which I would say that crafting SMB is actually okay, because you're not competing for too many other things. There are a bunch of other stuff that you can craft in there, but SMB is one of the better ones. And so that's not terrible to do at this point. I think it's not as good to do later because you can buy BT from Prapor 4, but at this stage you don't have that option. So SMB is good if you just want to be able to defeat everybody's armor. You also have the ability to craft M80, which is cheaper than it used to be. They've made that craft a little bit better. And if you're stacking that over the top of FMJ in 7.16 NATO, I think that's actually not that bad. At level 20, that will just destroy everybody with class 4 on. And this guy is not too bad either. So it's quite a good pairing. Then you can actually, if you didn't bother doing Peacekeeper or you got stuck somewhere, you can then make 56A1 there. So you can then use the MDR and the SCAR as you wish from that point. And this thing destroys class 4 and has really good damage with 54. For an assault rifle, for an intermediate caliber assault rifle round, 54 damage is a lot. Like compare this to PS and BP for 7.62, it's like 57 and 58 damage. Like it's really not that far off the bigger bullets. Honestly, it's really not that far off the bigger bullets. So I think it's very, very strong. It's one of the reasons why I like 56A1 so much until people start using class 5 a little bit more. Then you can also craft 366 AP. Again, 366 AP just keeps cropping up over and over and over again. And maybe I'll look into this a little bit more, but you can get this so many different ways, right? You can get it off the flea market, you can craft it, you can buy it. It's pretty nuts. But anyway, this goes in the guns that we talked about before and is super strong. It's like an enhanced version of M80. You can then do the SP6 craft, which is extremely powerful. The VSS obviously now is really in vogue. The Val also, but I think the VSS is slightly better. And this craft is a lot cheaper than the purchase for it. And again, you don't want to be using your workbench in the late game to be crafting ammos that you can buy, even if it's expensive, in my personal opinion. But early on when you've got workbench 2, if you're not making SMB or you don't really like using those guns, you could make SP6 instead. And it's a lot cheaper than... But it actually allows you to use the Val and the VSS because otherwise you just can't really. So we'll see how they look next wipe once the hype has died down from this wipe about the recall changes. But that could be a good goer kind of at level 20-ish, and that will annihilate people. It really will. This is also when you get the ability to create SS190 for the P90. I still don't think you get enough bullets. I think it takes too long, and I think it's too expensive to make it worth using. But it's potentially an option. You can also craft 9x21 BT for the Shrimp, or the SR2M, I should say, not the Shrimp. But 63 damage and 39 pen. This thing is extremely good. And maybe worth a craft. Same goes for 7.62. 45 AP, which is 66 damage and 38 pen. These things are very, very similar. Obviously, this goes in the UMP or the Vector, and this goes in the SR2M, so it kind of depends on which gun you want. But both of these being able to craft, and this one's actually a lot cheaper. The BT craft is quite expensive. This is like 1700-ish at the moment, so early wipe, who knows? But AP is about 750. Like, this craft is really cheap, and no one does it, just because the ammo is very limited on what guns it goes into, and it's either you choose the UMP with really low fire rate, or you choose the Vector with really high fire rate and have mag problems. So it's kind of complicated. People used to use this as just a random pickup, like a sidearm for bolties and that kind of thing. But now that UMP got nerfed and this thing's behind the craft, no one's using it anymore. So maybe useful for next wipe, we'll see. You can also make flechette here. So you don't have the ability to buy this yet normally, and the flea market is usually very expensive. So you can actually craft this out of empty cans, and you're probably using your hideout a bit more now. So you can use the empty metal cans to craft flechette and then use that in your shotguns. The only actual purchase really that comes through a Mechanic 2 is for the MP7, and this is now the new buff that they did for Subsonic in terms of tiering. Subsonic SX you can now buy on Mechanic 2, which I think is really powerful. Again, you're still going to have issues with the 20 rounders because you can't buy the 30 rounders for the MP7 until Mechanic 3. But I used it this wipe with the 20 rounders, and I completed Punisher Part 4 with it. So having Subsonics at this level, I actually think could be really, really powerful. So we will see. So yeah, guns wise, we're talking Mosin. Now you have access to the flea market. So like the Mosin, the DVL, the M700, and maybe the VPO2-on-5 with the 366 AP rounds for single fire gun or bolties. Semi-auto is like back to the RFB, the VPO209, and the 155 because of flechette and the ability to craft M80, and again 366. And then full auto, you really have the pick of the choice. Doesn't really matter, right? You've got the MDR, the SCAR, the VSS, the P90, the SR2M, UMP and the Vector, and the MP7 with the 20 round mags, which is, I don't know, there's lots of choice. There's a lot of choice that you have there based on the bullets that you're actually able to create. So the next one after level 20, you jump up to level 22. This is actually when you're able to then buy flechette. Once you've completed forest clearing, this one's actually locked behind the one where you have to kill PMCs in the factory office. But once you've done that, you then have to kill 50 scavs across the whole of Tarkov, and then you unlock flechette, which as a purchase it's very powerful. It's honestly my favorite shotgun shell, and it's what I use on all kind of like budget runs that I do around factory or whatever, just like kit yourself up in some class 4 or whatever. I think it's very, very good. So from that, 153 and the 155, probably the best two weapons, I think, for that kind of thing, because they're semi-auto, and flechette works really well with semi-auto shotguns and destroys everybody's armor, because it's the only one that actually has decent pen that is a multi-shot. So, you know, all of these have like 1 to, and what's the next best? This dual sabber just doesn't really work. So it's like 3 or something, but the fact that the penetration power is so high, this combines with the armor damage to just smash people's armor. So yeah, flechette is level 22, that's the deal. Level 23, we then unlock Peacekeeper 3. We now have the ability to buy copious amounts of FMJSX. This makes the MP7 extremely powerful. Again, you're still limited to the 20s. You can buy a 30 round off the flea market if you want to buy one and put it in the gun and use 20s separately. But it's so powerful with 40 pen. It destroys class 4, and the fire rate just annihilates people in CQB. It's like one of the best SMGs still. I'm still amazed that FMJ isn't restricted in some way, or that it's not Prepor 4, or sorry, Peacekeeper 4, or more expensive, or craft only, or something. I don't know. I don't know. Other things that you can buy, you can then start to use the P90 a little bit more, because you can buy L191. This bullet is not amazing, but it was consistently sold out mid-wipe this wipe, and I think people were stacking it a little bit with some of these other rounds, or just using it on its own, because the P90 with a 900 RPM and a 50 rounder, it means that you'll just kill people. 33 pen's not great for getting through class 4, but it's accuracy by volume, and eventually you'll get through, and 58 damage is pretty decent. So this was a fan favorite this time. I saw it sold out all the time. I used it a bit and I thought it was okay. You also have the ability to get AP 6.3, which is, again, it's another underwhelming bullet because of its 30 pen, but I think I've been testing it at the moment with the MP5 SD, so we'll see. And if you're hitting headshots with it, it's all right. After the buffs, I think 9mm weapons, because they had kind of low recoil already, but not low enough. With the 15% buff that we took recently on all the guns, I think maybe the MP5 SD might be getting back to being in a place where its low recoil makes up for the fact that the ammo is just not that powerful. It's kind of one of those interesting choices. I'd kind of prefer them to decrease the recoil even more if possible. and keep the ammo as being weak, because then it's a different playstyle. It's something interesting. I don't want all the ammos to be 37 pen and 45 damage, and all the guns, it looks like the illusion of choice, but they're all actually the same. That's not interesting to me. I'd rather some be underpowered but have lower recoil, some to be higher powered. So we've got loads on the higher powered side with more recoil, but not so much on the lower end. And then what else from Peacekeeper 3? So now you can get the 300 Blackout M62. So if you want to run the MCX with the equivalent of 56A1, you can do that at level 23. So that's kind of interesting. And then you can also buy Quake Maker for 9mm. I know I've kind of jumped back and forth a little bit, but we're sort of gone in pen order, which is 85 damage. So you can now leg meta people with like the MP9N and that kind of thing. So yeah, this is like, it's like the full auto level 23. It's the MP7, the P90, MP5 SD, the MP9 and the MP9N, the Vector 9 maybe, if you want to do some more leg meta stuff as well, and maybe the MPX if you're feeling kind of spicy. So after that, the next one, you jump to level 26. This is now Prapor 3. So now you can buy from him directly 7.62 54R PS, which just powers up this. It's a very, very good bullet with 45 damage, 45 pen. It's just extremely powerful. You can also easily buy from him the other rounds for 545, which is good. You can then get BT after completing Punisher 4 from him. You can buy BS with a barter, which beats class 5, and that makes 545s actually really good in the mid game. BT is now quite powerful with the extra 2 pen that they gave it this wipe. Like, for context, you know, that's got 1 more pen than M80. Like, the damage is obviously not there, but BT is looking pretty good now. And I think when we get to it next wipe, it means that it'll extend the longevity of the 545 guns as we go through. What's next? SP6. Yeah, so they keep fiddling around with this. We're going to have to see. By the time we get to the next wipe, 9x39 SP6 for the VSS. This thing is extremely good. It's basically BP. It's 7.62 BP, which is one of the, as I said right at the beginning, is one of the best rounds in the game. BP has 58 damage and 47 pen. SP6 has 58 damage and 46 pen. It's basically BP, which I agree with making it really expensive or make it restricted or whatever. It's like, it's one of the only bullets that you can get, that you can buy from the traders every single cycle, and it performs extremely well, and it's like firing a P90 with BP bullets inside. It's extremely good. I don't think balancing it by price is necessarily a bad thing, honestly, because it's like one of the best bullets in the entire game right now, based on the gun it goes in, the fire rate, the recoil, and the availability on the traders, in my opinion. So make it super expensive, I actually kind of don't mind. They've already reverted it once. They put it to like 3,100 or something. They've already reverted it down to like mid 2000s, I think, or low 2000s. I'm not sure. So we'll see where that ends up. 9x39 and the VSS and the Val, it's an extremely difficult caliber to balance just because of the way the guns perform. It's just really tough. It's just really, really tough to do. So we will see on that one. But anyway, you can get that at Prapor 3, so you can technically run this at level 26 if you have the money. You can also buy 9x21 PS. Where's 9x21 gone? Here it is. Which, again, all of these move down 1. This is the one that I mistook earlier for PE, but they all move down by 1 trader level. So getting this at Prapor 3 is actually pretty good. 49 damage and 35 pen is very strong with the fire rate on the SR2M. It's actually decent. So this is a contender. And then you can also buy Shrap 10, which is the ever-loved KS23 round. This thing with 8x87 technically can do 696 damage. So you only need to hit them with 6 pellets and they die in 1 shot, which is actually bonkers. It's actually bonkers. So you can get that at Prapor 3 as well. So guns in this particular caliber, I think in this category, I think the PS round for the SVD, so the SVD is really, really good. The AK-74 of any variety for BT and BS is like pretty good into sort of the medium end game, depending on whether you like these or not with the low damage. But I think you can make them work, right? They get a bad rap, but you can still technically make them work. The VSS, obviously, the SR2M and the KS23, because they're very specific, so you can only really choose one gun for each of those bullets that we talked about. Then from Prapor 26, level 26 Prapor, you move up to level 30, which again is a huge milestone. You've got Mechanic 3 and Workbench 3 all at the same time. And Mechanic 3 is, again, another prerequisite for Workbench 3. So all of this stuff kind of unlocks at the same time. You can now craft the best rounds in the game. You can craft M61, which is 70 damage and 64 pen, which just destroys everything. You can craft 7.62 BP, which is another full staple, because like M61 is typically used in semi-auto, so it kind of justifies the damage and the pen. BP is normally used on full auto, and so it absolutely destroys people with the stats that it has. You can then also craft M995. These were the 3 of my favorite rounds in the whole game, and this typically has slightly lower recoil and or is slightly cheaper and or has faster fire rate. Like, it depends on what you choose exactly. That's kind of the issue. Yes, you can also craft 300 Blackout AP, which technically speaking is as good as 7.62 BP, if not It's technically, it's arguable whether it's slightly better or not. I actually think it's probably not as good just because of the damage. The damage is slightly lower, 51 versus 58, which means it can't 2-tap a class 5, whereas BP actually has the option and the possibility to do that. It normally is a 3-tap against class 5, but it can 2-tap people if you get a lucky roll, whereas 300 AP can't because the damage is just too low and the mitigation is too low. But it does actually have one more pen, and the fire rate is way, way higher, but it's difficult to use this rather than trying to use any of these others because the fire rate is super high. The MCX doesn't get super low on recoil like the other guns do, so it's just a bit of a tough one to use. There's like a whole bunch of other things that you can craft in there, but those are sort of my favorite. You can get a Golnik for 545, but the pen's really high, but the damage is pretty low. Same thing for APSX, I feel, for the MP7, which is this guy here. The damage is too low. You can't even head tap people with this, even if they've got no helmet on. For the Ash, you can then craft PS12B, which is, again, it's like a 2-tap through class 5, which is pretty amazing, but you don't get enough bullets. And the Ash 12 is kind of too niche. It's too much recoil. It doesn't really make much sense. There is a new one for the VSS, this PAB9 craft, which you can do now, which is sort of a middle ground between SB6 and BP. I still don't think this really has a place when you can buy SB6 on Rapport, because you can just craft BP or craft something else and barter for BP. So I don't know if people are really going to be doing this one. I'm not sure, but it's an option. You can make 366 APM as well. There's another option for getting 366 APM. There's like so many different ways of getting it, and that's not too bad. And then the one thing that you can actually get on Mechanic himself is, again, back for the P90, you can now buy R37X. Like, the P90 is a really good leg shredding gun because this has 81 damage, and then the one, I'm just going to skip ahead very slightly, but you can get this one at Mechanic 4, R37F, with 98 damage. So that's a 5-shot. And with the P90 with its big mag, it's pretty awesome. So that's at level 30. So basically they're like single fire guns. It's all the stuff we talked about before. Plus you can craft 366 AP if you want for the VPO. Semi-auto again is the RFB, M1A, SR25 and VPO 209. At level 30 you're probably not going to be using the big old guns because they're stuck up behind Peacekeeper 4. You can't use the big ones yet. And then the full auto, it's the usual suspects, right? AKM, AK-101, maybe the MCX if you're crafting the bullets for it. Any of the AK-74 type weapons, the MP7, maybe the Ash, the VSS, and potentially the MP5 SD or the Vector 9. Right, last couple. Up to Jaeger at level 33. You now have the ability to do 9mm rip from a barter. This is really powerful if you want to do leg matter. 102 damage, it's another 5-shot kill. Pair that with the MP9N and you'll go far. And a lot of people like doing this. Some people mix it with Quake as well, but you can barter for this rip and it's not actually too much. Yeah, MP9N, Vector, MP5 SD, that can all work. There's a bit of a gap actually between level 30 and then that level 33 just kind of on its own. And then level 36, where you get to Prapor 4. And you can finally buy 54 RBT, which I was saying, once you can buy 54 RBT, I don't think you should ever be making SMB. I think you should be using your workbench to make other things like M61, BP, and M995. Don't make SMB. You can use BT instead. Unless you really care about the tracer thing, then maybe. But with 55 pen, it's only class 60 you're ever worried about with this. You're going to one-tap everybody in the head unless they're wearing literally like a killer helmet and you hit them in the visor. Most of the time, BT is fine. In 99.9% of cases in Tarkov fights, BT is good enough, and I mean, it does a little bit more damage. Not that that matters too much, but you want to be using your workbench for other stuff. Buy BT and over SMB once you have Prapor 4. And then the other thing that you can get is, this is sort of the point of PAB9 not being very useful, is that you can still buy SP6, but you can also barter for BP. This BP barter is one of the only rounds that you can barter for that's super, super high level. 60 damage and 55 pen. It's like 54 RBT that we just looked at, but with less damage. This makes it insane. Combine this with SP6, which is amazing anyway, and that's why I think the VSS is probably one of the best guns in the game right now. So yeah, at this level, basically it opens up more of the SVD, and potentially the VSS. So, ticking up next one, level 37. You can now open up the 338 FMJ. A fun bullet and a fun gun. This thing has 122 damage and 47 pen. So it's a 50-50 through class 5 that'll one-tap you. And that happened to me today, actually, on Lighthouse, which was fun. But you open up the ability to buy this. You need to kill Sturman to complete his quest before you can buy the XMC, but you can do Tarkov Shooter with that gun, and this is extremely powerful. The AP rounds are only found in Raid, so you can never get these. The FMJs, you can buy 20 of them per reset from Peacekeeper, and it's very, very good. It's a fun gun, especially unsuppressed, I find, because it's super loud and people get scared. Peacekeeper is also then selling M80. I think at this point, I think M80 personally should be on Peacekeeper 3, I think. I'm not 100% decided on that, but I think so, because by the time you get there, you kind of it's kind of outstripped. Some people do use it exclusively, and it is still a good bullet, but I feel like it's more of a stacking round underneath M61 and M62. So it's useful to have there because it allows you to buy both M80 and M62 per trader cycle. And M62 is also purchasable at Peacekeeper 4. So you can buy both of these at the same time, and you put M62 at the top and M80 at the bottom, or you can use only M80 if you want, or you can use M61 with M80 underneath if you want to try and do some kind of, so one thing you buy, one thing you craft. That's what I quite like about M9, M5 and 85501, for example. You can craft one and you buy the other, and you stack them together and you make your ammo go further. What else? Oh yeah, speaking of, M85501 becomes available. So that's the thing. The weird thing about this is that M9, M5, because it's Workbench 3, which is technically level 30, M9, M5, technically speaking, becomes available before M85501, which is only available at level 37 because it's Peacekeeper 4, which is kind of weird. So you can, in theory, have a situation where you're using M995 over 85601, in theory. Not that I think anyone does. But that's kind of how the progression curve goes now, which is a bit weird. And then the other one that you can get is SB193. So I think I said before that it was mechanic, but I think it's Peacekeeper actually. So you can buy SB193 for the P90. Just bear in mind, this bullet is really slow. It's really, really slow. So even if you're firing over 30 meters, there was actually a clip from one of the top players of the game, Desmond Pilak. Go check him out. He's a cracked player. And he was shooting at somebody on streets from the sky bridge over Pinewood Hotel to a little truck. And he was shooting the guy dead on, and the bullets were missing because the guy was running at full speed at 90 degrees. And SB193 is too slow, and it had maybe, 70 centimeters of clearance behind the dude as he was running, and he didn't hit with it because this thing is just so slow. So you do have to be really careful, and you have to lead even at close ranges, which is really weird. It's really weird. So just beware of SB193. But it's then available to buy, which then makes the P90 a lot more usable. You can then in theory craft this and stack it over this, but you really need to be able to buy something, right, for these guns. You can't really just use craft only ammo unless you're just using one gun. If you just craft BP and you only ever use 7.62 by 39 guns, you can kind of get away with it. But if you want to use a variety of things, you kind of need to have a bullet that you buy that goes underneath as well as with your crafted stuff. Or you just use the bought stuff only. So the weapons, AXMC for the FMJ after you kill Sherman. And then the RFB, the M1A, the SR25 and the RSAS. These all become an option because at Peacekeeper 4 you can then go and buy these things. And you can go and buy those guns. So those are pretty good. You also have the ability to get the Scar H, the MDR for the full auto ones, but you need to complete some Peacekeeper requests for that. And then, 855 really opens up the AK-101 and like maybe the M4 even, or the HK if you want. And then the P90 with the SB193. Right, so we're getting quite close to the end. Level 38 is Skier 4. He just has one bullet. It's weird actually that a lot of the leg meta stuff opens out a lot later on in progression. He gives you another Barter for 9mm rip, but the Jaeger Barter is cheaper. So we'll skip up to mechanic because there's nothing else in between really. So yeah, that gives you the ability to buy 45 ATP rip, which is 130 damage, and it's insane. This is probably the best leg meta non-shotgun bullet in the whole game because it's 130 damage and kills people in 4 shots, and you can put it in the vector. And then with a 30 rounder, this just absolutely deletes people if you get your leg meta done right. It's insane. The other one that you can get from Mechanic 4 is the other leg meta round, which is the one I alluded to earlier, which is the R37F round. I always try to remember it as like F for flesh, because F is the most damaging one for the P90, and that is a 5-shot with the P90. So that's sort of similar. It's a little bit less damage, but 5 shots is still pretty amazing. It's still pretty amazing. So yeah, that opens up the P90, the UMP, and the Vector. So after that, after level 40, there really isn't anything else. So yeah, that's it. That's the end. That's the end. Another one of these tutorials type things down. So I hope everybody enjoyed it.